The horse cards from Age of Overlord are incredibly hyped up. Some are calling them the next big splashable engine in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, while others are saying that they're going to completely take over the metagame. And while the cards are very strong, especially in a vacuum, I'm here with the controversial take that I actually think that they're going to flop in the TCG, at least for the time being. Now let me put that into context before anyone says Cap thinks that these cards suck, he says that they're trash, etc, etc. First off, I don't believe either, and the cards are again very strong. However, is this going to be the next adventurer engine where the package is going to be run in maybe 3 or 4 tier 1 decks at the same time, and duelists are going to want various cards in the theme hit on the ban list? No, I certainly don't see that. For anyone living under a rock, the new horse support consists of 5 cards, 4 monsters, and 1 spell that ties everything together. The spell, King's Sarcophagus, is by far the most important part. It's a continuous spell that makes all your horse monsters immune from destruction effects unless they're specifically targeted. It also lets you send one of your opponent's monsters to the graveyard whenever a horse monster battles at the start of the damage step once per turn. Lastly is the setup or combo effect that can be used up to 4 times per turn. This allows you to send any card from your hand to the graveyard to foolish any of the horse monsters from your deck. The reason you want to do this is because all 4 horse monsters can reborn themselves once per turn if Sarcophagus is face up on the field. The 4 horse monsters are massive level 8 bodies with pretty high attack power outside of Blessing, who has 0 attack and defense but gains 1200 of each for each horse monster you control. Each horse monster also punishes your opponent for attempting to remove cards from your field, as they all have built-in trigger effects that vary from drawing cards equal to the amount of monsters in your main monster zone with different names to just sending any card on the field to the graveyard with a non-targeting effect. So essentially you play the Sarcophagus, send a bunch of cards from your hand to the graveyard to dump all the horse monsters, then they reborn themselves for free and you have a massive army with built-in protection from the Sarcophagus itself. And if your opponent is able to remove any of the cards from your field, you'll be able to trigger one or multiple powerful effects that helps you easily overwhelm them in terms of card advantage. Combine that with the excellent rank 8 toolbox that includes the Zombie Vampire, Coach King Giant Trainer, Dengirsu, Hope Harbinger, Galaxy Eyes Photon Lord, and just a bunch of other awesome number monsters, and you can understand how this package sounds almost unbeatable. However, there are a couple of huge problems. The first should be glaringly obvious, and that's that the horse cards do almost nothing without King Sarcophagus on the field. Now granted, Glory has an amazing effect that lets you send any 2 cards, including itself, from your hand to the grave to search out Sark and draw a card. This leaves you with 5 cards going first and a free level 8 to reborn. But outside of that, hard drawing Sarcophagus is the only way to gain access to the card. This could really put duelists in a bind where they obviously want to open with Sark access, but they may feel inclined to play multiple copies or even max out on the card to make sure that they have the highest chance of seeing it. That's good and all, but at the end of the day, only 2 of the 5 cards actually are starters for the entire package. This is in a pretty sharp contrast to the Adventurer engine, where all the monsters could easily be summoned to your field if you didn't have the engine rolling to just serve as bodies or link material. Each horse monster, on the other hand, is level 8, meaning if you draw any of them and you don't have Sarcophagus access, they're pretty much just dead cards you can never summon and are extremely difficult to get any value from. Another issue is that while the horse package is extremely hard to combat when it gets rolling, it does have to get rolling first, and the monsters won't gain any of those crazy on-field effects until they're actually on the field. Translation, if you use Sarcophagus to dump a horse monster to the grave, you should fully expect your opponent to throw everything and the kitchen sink at it in terms of removal to keep those guys buried in the graveyard for good. Dedicated spell and trap removal, on-field pops, and yes, even obscure hand traps like Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. If the Sark is immediately removed, the horse player could be down in card advantage and have a bunch of big bodies that are stuck in the graveyard permanently. For anyone thinking, oh come on Cap, no one's gonna play Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, I would like to point out that at YCS Philly, which wasn't even 6 months ago, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit was incredibly popular as an answer to decks like Purely and Super Heavy Samurai.
With decent mills, you can therefore get up to 4 of these ancient Egyptian assholes, each of which imbues your other horse cards with protection. And that's it. Yeah, these incredibly hyped cards mostly amount to a mechanism by which you can get 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons onto your side of the field, a strategy that didn't work for Kaiba in 1999 and definitely won't work against modern strategies. Except, there's nothing saying you can't play them alongside modern strategies. While conventional knowledge supports playing them in Tearlament as a way to access the zombie vampire, that deck's not really hurting for ways to mill.
People have been trying the Horus engine in various decks, and so far Tear Elements has been the most popular, but honestly, from what I've seen, it's not actually that good. People have been testing it in Tier because Sark and Glory both can help you send cards from your hand, which trigger all the cards in the Tier archetype, meaning that you don't actually go neg in card advantage, and sometimes you can even go plus. Tier also mills a lot of cards as part of its game plan, meaning that if you already have Sark face up on the field and you mill a bunch of the Horus cards themselves, then they just become free bodies for whatever you choose, and going second, it makes it way easier to kill the opponent because of their giant attack values. The issue here is that without Sark access, the Horus cards are absolutely dreadful to mill and don't accomplish anything. This includes the Sark itself. Unlike the Shadow cards, none of these have trigger effects that activate when they hit the graveyard. So a lot of times when TCG players run Horus in Tier, you'll see them mill like 5 cards and hit 3 Horus cards that do absolutely nothing, well outside of maybe helping you make Mud Dragon via the fusion effects of the Tier element monsters, but that's not impressive in the slightest considering you can already run cards like King of the Swamp, Danger Nessie, and Gamecill, all of which I would argue have more natural synergy with the Tier element deck. When things do go right, the Horus engine does allow Tier to go into some very simple zombie vampire plays, but honestly, are those as good as people think? Tier is easily one of the most popular meta decks in the TCG right now, and milling your opponent's deck is something that can obviously and easily backfire. Your opponent can hit shufflers that can inhibit your ability to fusion summon altogether, or they can hit Tier spells and traps and net them free card advantage without them even playing into something like Triple Tactics Talents. Honestly, it just feels like that play is a giant crapshoot, especially in game 1 when you don't know what you're playing against a lot of the times. Put all your resources into a rank 8, hope that you mill well, hope that you're also not playing against literally the most popular deck in the TCG, at least competitively, and if you are playing against that extremely popular deck, you have to hope that they don't mill well as well. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. With Tier Cash, Yugioh, Kelback, Scream, Havness, Merly, and cards like Foolish Burial and Diviner of the Herald to access all these said cards, Tier isn't out here losing games because it lacks milling options. Tier often loses games because the mills don't accomplish much, which is ironically a problem that the Horus cards actually exacerbate. People have also tried Horus Therion, which from what I saw from MBT's 10-minute testing video, is pretty much a mediocre, inconsistent brickfest. It's taking a wildly inconsistent deck known for bricking on a bunch of high-level monsters and adding even more high-level monsters into the mix. Obviously, the results are not going to be spectacular. To make matters worse, the payoff for the deck isn't even good, as you're often just ending on a board with Regulus and like one other monster, which you should realize a deck like Super Heavy Samurai can do consistently, and that deck is so bad that it basically doesn't even exist anymore in the TCG. Where I do think Horus actually shines and can be incredibly valuable in is Phantom Knights. Horus works in PK for so many reasons. First, unlike Tier, you're not throwing it into a deck that's already amazing at the expense of a better engine and making it objectively worse. PK's current supplemental engine, Adventure, is solid and fine, but obviously it's not enough to make the deck consistently meta. This means that Phantom Knights does have a ceiling or high-end power problem. Second, the Horus engine doesn't conflict with Adventure or the Phantom Knight cards themselves if they're used before Breaksword's effect. Both engines also give you a solid discard outlet for your Horus monsters in hand that aren't Sarcophagus or Glory by the way of Fateful Adventure and Torrent Scales. Also, Phantom Knights have practical uses for the rank 8s that you can make, in particular number 90 Galaxy Photon Lord, which can insulate the deck from Nibiru. This is important because historically, Nib has pretty much destroyed the PK deck if they don't have Griffin Rider on the field, with of course the Brave token, which of course requires them to already have Adventure engine access. PKs have also done traditionally well, main decking stuff like Forbidden Droplet, which again can be another great outlet for them to get use out of the Horus monsters that are dead in their hand, and just like Tier, pretty much the entire PK archetype works with King Sarcophagus, as nearly every PK card has an effect that works while in the graveyard. There are of course other decks and archetypes that Horus can work really well with, like Eldritch, Evil Eye, and Ogdoadic, and possibly even the upcoming Centurion archetype, but I just don't see this engine taking over the metagame. Everyone seems to be convinced that it makes Tier better, but most of the time it appears to be just the opposite, and if it doesn't catch on in that deck, it's most likely going to be relegated to Tier 2 ones or some of the more rogue themes. A serious far cry from Adventurer, which definitely brought the TCG to its knees the very moment that it was legal for YCS play. I think it has a ton of rewarding plays and can make a lot of decks look insane, but there's also a lot of risk attached to it because either you're playing a lot of bricks that you don't want to draw, or you're playing a relatively small package that you might not actually see because you don't run that many of the Horus cards to begin with. Obviously, only time will tell, and YCS Indianapolis will be incredibly interesting as this will be the first major competitive event in the TCG where these cards will be legal, which is why I'm shooting to get this video out prior to that tournament. But I'll pass the question on to you. Do you believe that the Horus engine is, I guess, just a little overhyped and that it is not going to be the next meta dominant engine that takes over the TCG? Or maybe you think that it is going to do that a la Adventurer during the 7s era, or maybe Destiny Heroes during like GX? You know, leave that in the comment section below because I really want to hear people's opinions. I've seen some of the pre-sale prices on these cards. I've seen them thrown in so many decks, and I mean, people are just going nutty with the hype. But yeah, we'll definitely find out soon. Thank you guys for watching, as always.